Peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. The pyramids of Giza are among the structures that have baffled scientists and researchers for centuries, especially the Great Pyramid. The Pyramid of Khufu consists of 2.3 million stones. These stones are so incredibly heavy that a single one can weigh over 70 tons. At the same time, the pyramid is exceptionally tall, reaching a height of 150 meters. Now, I know most of us aren't big fans of numbers, but these figures are truly mind-boggling. How on earth did those absolute legends, the ancient Egyptians, manage to lift such massive stones to such incredible heights? This task would be daunting for us even today, despite all our modern technology, equipment, and advanced construction methods. So how did people from over 4,000 years ago build this colossal monument when they had zero technology, zero heavy machinery, and absolutely nothing but a set of basic metal tools and some timber? But what's even weirder than all of this is how did they secure these pyramid stones on top of each other without using any cement or adhesive materials? The answer to this question has to be one of two things. Either it's witchcraft, God forbid, or they managed to figure out a specific construction method that required neither modern tech nor complex tools. A method so profoundly simple that because of its sheer simplicity, it never crossed anyone's mind. Welcome to this episode where we answer your questions. Today, we're answering, how did the pharaohs build the pyramids? Before we dive in, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos. The wild theories, aliens and giants. The topic of how the pharaohs built the pyramids is packed with a massive array of theories. Some are completely dismissed, others are somewhat acceptable, and some are, well, pretty amusing. For instance, one hypothesis pushes the idea that the ones who built these pyramids were actually aliens. Yes, exactly. And while this might sound hilarious to some, there is actually a whole bunch of published studies and research on the matter, and a massive number of people truly firmly believe that extraterrestrials built the pyramids. But of course, this makes no sense at all, and is purely a wild guess. Another bizarre myth stuck in some people's minds is the belief that the ancient Egyptians were giants with towering bodies, kind of like the Titans in Attack on Titan. According to them, it would be a piece of cake for such giants to just lift the stones with their bare hands, carry them from one place to another, and effortlessly build the pyramid. Heck, they might have even been playing catch with those stones. Naturally, this is completely false. The pharaohs were not giants at all. Their heights on average were perfectly normal. The proof? The mummified bodies of the pharaohs resting in museums are neither oversized nor massive. They're the exact same size as any other human being. Furthermore, if we look at the coffins found in tombs, museums, or even inside the pyramids themselves, we'll find that the dimensions are completely ordinary, nothing colossal about them. So the pharaohs had bodies just like ours, just without the beer bellies. The traditional story and why it fails. The traditional story we were told when we were kids is that they transported these stones all the way from upper southern Egypt to the current pyramid site. They supposedly moved 2.3 million stones, each weighing tons over that massive span of time. But whatever, let's look past that. Finally, they allegedly built a giant dirt ramp around the pyramid, dragged these massive stones over cylindrical wooden rollers, and pulled them with ropes using oxen and laborers. And boom, the pyramids were built. While this story usually flies under the radar, we really need to pause for a second and think about this. First of all, scientifically speaking, for this method to actually work, that ramp needs to be made of reinforced concrete. A ramp made purely of dirt could never withstand a 70-ton weight moving over it. It would simply sink and collapse. Second, those wooden rollers. Wood wouldn't bear those insane loads either. You would need, at the very least, ultra-strong steel wheels because we are talking about 70 tons. Therefore, the whole wooden roller and dirt ramp theory makes zero sense. Even if we assume they somehow pulled it off, the volume of the dirt ramp described would have to be 10 times larger than the volume of the pyramid itself. Some thinkers even argue that building such a colossal dirt ramp and constructing those massive roads around the pyramid, only to clear them away later without leaving any trace, is an achievement that surpasses the grandeur of the pyramid itself. Scientifically, it's impossible to remove such giant ramps and roads without leaving any footprint. And since we haven't found any trace to this day, it pretty much makes the whole bedtime story completely inaccurate. Recent attempts to save the theory. Some recent hypotheses have emerged trying to back up the previous theory. Some researchers guessed that while the pharaohs were pulling the stones over those wooden rollers, they were splashing water on them. This would ease the movement of the rollers and cut the force needed to move the stones by almost half. As for how they transported 2.3 million massive stones from southern Egypt to Giza, researchers suggest that the desert area where the pyramids stand was actually a river delta at that time, featuring multiple branches and canals branching off the Nile. Therefore, they transported the stones via water. But of course, at the end of the day, these are all just attempts to justify the flawed method we mentioned. Despite all of this, the method remains entirely illogical and leaves too many unanswered questions. The biggest question of all is how did they lift these massive stones to such staggering heights without any cranes, aircraft, or modern machinery? Of course, nobody has an answer. Did the pharaohs, for example, have a device that allowed them to cancel gravity in a specific area, making the stones float effortlessly so a pharaoh can just go, "Up you go," and the stone snaps into place? Unfortunately, there is zero evidence for that either. The aha moment: air pockets versus liquid concrete. Let's quickly move on to another point. How are the pyramid stones held together without the use of cement? The answer they gave us back in the day, and boy, those old school teachings really misled us, was that they secured the stones on top of each other using what's called a vacuum, or air displacement. This basically means they would place two stones together and somehow extract the air between them, causing the stones to lock together as if there was an adhesive material between them. But again, there is absolutely no evidence for this either. It's pure guesswork, because creating a vacuum in itself requires highly advanced technology. Now, one of the most astonishing things about the pyramids is how they got the surfaces of the stones to be so perfectly flat and precise. The pyramid stones are shaped into uniform cubes, cuboids, and rectangles, meaning these blocks had to be carved. Imagine doing that carving with primitive gear and basic tools. That is practically a suicide mission. Leveling the surface of 2.3 million stones would take an unimaginable amount of time and an extraordinary workforce. Therefore, the idea of carving out the rocks is also completely illogical. So pretty much every method and hypothesis we've heard so far has turned out to be wrong. Alright, bye guys. Yes, kidding, let's keep going. What would be your reaction if I told you that the stone blocks used to build the pyramids were actually poured at site, exactly like we pour regular concrete today, and that these rocks were never carved at all? This groundbreaking idea was proposed by Swiss researcher Eric Mandonican and French scientist Joseph Davidoff. Both argued that the ancient Egyptians knew a recipe for a specific mix that creates a synthetic stone even harder than the concrete we use today. This mixture consists of mud and certain chemicals that are heated. When this mix dries, it looks exactly like natural rock and can last for thousands of years. Just imagine, using this simple hypothesis solves every single problem we faced with all the previous theories. We wouldn't need to cut and carve rocks with high precision, we wouldn't need to transport rocks over insane distances, and we wouldn't need to lift them to those crazy heights either. This is an absolute game changer. How did they uncover this secret? Where did this whole thing start? It began when a group of scientists was searching for a secret chamber inside the pyramid. They scanned the entire pyramid with advanced X-rays, and suddenly they noticed that the devices were giving them conflicting, nonsensical results, even though the equipment was perfectly fine and had no malfunctions. The only logical explanation for what happened is that the pyramid rocks contained a massive amount of water inside them. Scientifically, that amount of moisture simply cannot exist in natural stone. This is what leaned them toward the idea that these stones were manufactured or man-made. Joseph Davidoff ran a practical experiment where he tried to replicate a similar mix. The experiment was a success, yielding positive results.
he was actually able to manufacture stones of these sizes that seamlessly bonded together. Currently, researchers are trying to figure out the exact chemical composition of the mix the pharaohs used. They say the secret of this recipe is just one of many secrets the pharaohs mastered, much like their advanced knowledge in astronomy, chemistry, and mummification. In short, the pyramid stones were a material closely resembling liquid cement concrete, poured into hollow rectangular molds. Once they dried, they turned into solid, uniform rocks. This is how they built this monumental marvel. It's highly likely they used this exact same method for other structures too, like temples and massive obelisks. They weren't lifting or moving stones, they were pouring them right into place inside molds. Of course, we're not saying that this pouring hypothesis is the absolute undeniable method the pharaohs used to build the pyramids, but we are saying that so far it is the most logical and acceptable theory. Maybe someday another theory will emerge to clarify the mystery even further. Ultimately, no one can deny that the pharaohs reached the level of science in certain fields that we haven't been able to replicate to this